On today's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, we're breaking down the NBA's Central Division. Where do the Pistons stack in their division against the likes of the Cleveland Cavaliers, Milwaukee Bucks, Indiana Pacers, and Chicago Bulls? Can the Pistons win the division? Where will they finish? All of that on today's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another exciting night of NBA basketball.
The Pistons are digging in. They got the depth. They got the big men. They got the better basketball team. No doubt about it.
Pistons need a three, and they have just under 3 seconds to do it. Here's Chauncey Billups. Here it is. He's got it. He's got it. Chauncey Billups hits the three. Overtime. Amazing.
Out of bounds. Detroit basketball.
Pistons fans, welcome back to the Palace Pistons Podcast, part of the Believe Network, brought to you by FanDuel. I am your host, Mike Anguilano. Joining me this week is Aaron Johnson. Aaron, how are you doing, my friend?
Doing good, Mike. Super pumped to be bringing you the latest edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, now brought to you by FanDuel. We've kind of been joking about it for the last few weeks, how we're now sponsored by nobody. Well, it's a big time somebody now. So
it's a big time somebody is right.
To get into everything that we've got today, I think this is going to be a really fun discussion. This is like the perfect time of the offseason where you can really start to get into these hypotheticals and start like laying out how you think next season could play out for the team that you're talking about. In this case, we're talking about the Central Division. So I think it's going to be a really fun show, a really fun discussion. I'm interested to hear once we talk about it, what the people who are listening have to say, because they might disagree with where we're placing these teams in the division, where the Pistons might get placed, and I think it's going to be a really good conversation.
Depending on how many Milwaukee Bucks fans this podcast reaches, I don't think we're going to have a whole lot of people who are going to disagree with where we have the Central Division teams stacking up. And so that is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be starting at the bottom of the division, or what we think will be the bottom of the division, and we are going according to odds on FanDuel right now. So we are going to start with the Chicago Bulls at plus 16,000 odds to win the Central Division, and we're going to work our way up to who FanDuel has as the number one, or at least the team with the best odds to win the Central, and we'll have some discussions around that. Just as a sort of a recap, since a lot has happened since the NBA season ended, the Bulls were fifth. They went 39-43. The Pistons were fourth. They went 44-38. The Bucks were third. They went 48-34. The Indiana Pacers went 50-32. They were in second, and the Cleveland Cavaliers were 64-18. But we are going to be going according to FanDuel odds, starting at the bottom. So, Aaron, let's talk about the Chicago Bulls. They are the ultimate average team. I mean, just like have made the play-in tournament every year since it was started. They are the model consistent average team. They are kind of an incomplete team right now, too. They don't have Josh Giddey signed to a contract. He's still a restricted free agent. So, but even with that information sort of not known quite yet on what his situation is, the Chicago Bulls are rated fifth according to FanDuel and least likely to win the Central Division. What are your thoughts on the Bulls at this juncture, July 31st?
I mean, I think FanDuel is being spot on, if not a little generous at plus 16,000. I don't know, dude. The Bulls are just the least inspiring team to me. Like, despite liking a few of their guys, I like Matas Buzelis, I like Kobe White. I know Nikola Vucevic is a very flawed player, but I still like what he can do a little bit. Outside of that, this is just a really blah roster. It's got a bunch of young guys. It's got a bunch of journeyman NBA players, and no one that really pops out with star potential unless Matas Buzelis hits his like absolute peak. They're going to be bad. I don't think this is a team where even if they play hard, they could be an average team. I think you're looking at a group here that is on the outside of the play-in, even like they might be a bottom three team in the entire conference, and that's saying something with some of the stinker teams out there like Brooklyn. But no, this is not a team that is anywhere near the top 8 in the conference, and I really think they are the bottom of this specific Central Division. Again, they've got some young players that look. It's going to be a big year for some of these guys to get a lot of playing time and to develop, and you'll see that with Buzelis, you'll see that with Noah Senge, their first round draft pick. Maybe this is a year where Patrick Williams can stay healthy for a long period of time and take somewhat of a step forward. But there's nothing there that really excites me about Chicago, especially when we're talking about them winning games this upcoming season.
Yeah, I think your comment about them being a bottom 3 team in the East is very interesting. Because there's a lot of very not good teams in the East. Are they worse than Washington?
I don't know. Like Washington has a large collection of young pieces that are at least like intriguing to watch. Like outside of Buzelis and Kobe White and maybe Noah Senge will be something, but like Washington's got a ton of different young players to that are at least going to be intriguing to watch play. And then they've also got a handful of veterans on the roster. I mean, CJ McCollum isn't nothing, right? They get out of the Jordan Poole fiasco, and
right.
He wasn't terrible for them last year, but he's not a guy you want to be paying $40 million a year to. And they get CJ McCollum, who they get off his contract a year earlier. So I don't know. They've got a few veterans that have experience at least, and I just think they have a wider collection of young talent that collectively has a higher ceiling than this Chicago team does. So I don't know. Like they're probably pretty even, I would say.
Interesting. Okay. Not that this is a Palace of Wizards podcast, but it's just very, very intriguing to hear you say that they're a bottom 3 team.
I mean, are they
They're
better
definitely
than
the bottom
Charlotte?
team? Are they better than Charlotte? They're probably pretty even. Charlotte has about 1 billion guards.
I think I'd rather back a team with individually better players like LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller, and even some of their other assets. Con Knipple, Trey Mann, like they have some other pieces. I don't know. Like I just look at the Bulls roster and it's like Trevon Carter, Jalen Smith.
Oh, it's boring.
Isaac Okoro. Like these are all like they're all like kind of NBA players, but none of them are like that. They just don't have like game changers. I don't know.
No,
like
they
these
don't.
guys are what they are. Trey Jones, another guy, like he is what he is. He's a backup level rotation player in the NBA for probably a lower end team. I don't know. I think I could talk myself into teams like Charlotte and Washington having a better outcome than Chicago this year.
I could talk myself into Charlotte because they do have the best player out of those 2 teams with LaMelo Ball, but on paper, Ball and whatnot, they are better. It's just in practice. I just don't know how well his ankles will hold up. He inevitably has all these ankle injuries. But the Bulls are definitely, there's no question, they're the worst team in the Central Division. They're a team that has been primed for a blow up, I don't know, 7 years now. When did they trade Jimmy Butler? Whenever they traded him was probably when they were primed for a blow up. So the fact they still haven't done it is quite impressive. The fact that they are so content with being hovering around 500 forever is really just, noble in today's boomer bust NBA, where you're either horrific or you're dumping every pick and player into a superstar team. The Bulls are just super content with, rolling out Trey Jones and letting Josh Giddey do his thing for 30 minutes a night. So Bulls are definitely the worst team in the Central Division. I still just feel like they're going to accidentally make the play-in again because you're going to have the Brooklyns, the Charlottes, the Washingtons, the Torontos of the world. And Toronto's an interesting team.
Ooh,
they should be a lot better.
Toronto should be a lot better than Chicago, I would think.
But Miami, I don't know how good the Heat are going to be.
That's the problem.
No idea.
Once you get past the top 6 of the East, you don't have to be a really good team to be 7, 8, 9. Like Miami should have a case for those spots with what they have. I mean, Tyler Hero, Bam Adebayo, Norm Powell, like they have enough at least when you stack them up against these other teams that we've talked about as these bottom teams of the conference. Like
They should. But there's no question about from the division side that the Bulls are last. And actually, a team that oddly might be competing with them in that play-in area is the team that's right above them, according to FanDuel, to win the Central Division. That's the Indiana Pacers. The Pacers are plus 2,300. Of course, they don't have Tyrese Halliburton for the rest of, the entire upcoming season because of his torn Achilles. They, made the NBA Finals, obviously. And this is a team that won 50 games last year. Kind of came out of nowhere for the last 2 years. They made the Eastern Conference Finals the year prior against Boston, and then they make the NBA Finals this year. That they're on that trajectory upward, and then the injury to Tyrese Halliburton just completely derailed whatever momentum they had. They let Miles Turner walk to Milwaukee, who we'll get to in a moment. The Pacers are a very odd team. Like they should still be scrappy. They should still be okay because they still have Pascal Siakam. And they still have a plethora of solid wings and a good coach in Rick Carlisle. What are your thoughts on the Pacers this upcoming season? Are they just dead in the water? Are they a 9-10 play-in team type of deal? Are they a team that's going to shut down Pascal Siakam late in the year because they're out of the playoff picture and they don't want to injure him, or let him get injured for when they do get Tyrese Halliburton back?
Yeah, look, it's unfortunate if you're a Pacer fan to be playing in the NBA Finals, be on the cusp of winning a championship, and then not only does your star player get hurt in that game, but he also suffers an injury that is going to force him to sit out all of next season. It drastically changed what the offseason looked like for the Pacers, so much to the point they went from in the playoffs it being reported that they were prepared to sign a Miles Turner to a massive offer sheet to instead letting him go in division to Milwaukee. It's a team that then decided to not really make any other moves in the offseason. Granted, all of this could change. There's still time in the offseason for trades and other free agency signings. But as of now, this is an Indiana team that's essentially walking into next year without Miles Turner, without Tyrese Halliburton, and their biggest move of the offseason was bringing in Jay Huff. Like they're just I don't know how good they can be. Like they have an elite coach in Rick Carlisle. He will get them to play hard. They still have a all-star to near all-star level player in Pascal Siakam. There's a great opportunity for guys like Benedict Mathurin and Andrew Nembhard to take considerable leaps into featured and prominent roles within the team's offense and ecosystem. We'll see if there's a leap now for Jarris Walker. Can he step into a bigger role? I know, for as touted of a guy as he was coming into the draft a few years back, he's not really popped in Indiana, whether it's been because of where he's at on the depth chart or the lack of minutes or for maybe just not being the prospect that we thought he was coming out of Houston. There's going to be an opportunity for him. Like they have enough guys and they have that playoff experience, that playoff pedigree, and they have that attitude of like, they will play hard to the point where they will win games. They will be a scrappy team. I feel like no matter what, like as long as Siakam's there to give them that 20 to 25 points a game, I think you'll see a pretty significant step forward in terms of scoring for Benedict Mathurin, which is what I think it should be. I think he's got a lot of talent, and they need to really use this year as that leap year for him. And then with the other guys that I mentioned, you add in Aaron Nesmith, you bring in Jay Huff. Like they have some guys. Again, in the East, they're in a situation where they could still find themselves in the play-in simply because of how bad the East is.
Absolutely. And TJ McConnell is no slouch. He's perfect as a backup point guard, but he's going to get more run. Ben Shepherd, I think, is technically their backup. Is he their backup point guard, or is he kind of a combo?
Ben Shepherd, he's like a 2-3.
Yeah, he's like a 2-3. He's listed as a backup or as a point guard for some reason, but they are going to be scrappy. They kind of embody this positionless basketball type deal where Halliburton is big enough to defend bigger players. And then they have, like you said, all those wings that caused huge problems for the Cavs in the playoffs. Aaron Nesmith and Andrew Nembhard were just terrors, and those guys are still healthy. I am interested about Walker because you're right; he hasn't popped. He hasn't really had an opportunity to pop with Siakam sort of blocking his way and Obi Toppin there as well. But now with no Miles Turner, maybe you see Siakam play more five with Jay Huff. Maybe you see Huff and Siakam because Jay Huff is a fine center. He's obviously not a playoff caliber starting center, but he's was fine with the Memphis Grizzlies. The Pacers are a team that I think is going to be hard to win games in like February and January against them because they're just not going to slow down.
Right.
Rick Carlisle's he's like an Eric Spoelstra where he like squeezes as much basketball out of his players as possible. But I can't really argue with the fact that FanDuel has them listed with the fourth worst odds to win the Central Division. There's just teams above them that either have better players or are just more complete at this stage. So, but still, they're going to be a tough out. It seems like Indiana always is a tough out.
I agree. But it does feel like Chicago being expected to finish fifth and Indiana being expected to finish fourth in the Central. I feel like that makes a lot of sense. Just looking at the rosters, looking at the teams.
Yeah,
it just that those two teams, like there might be some debate coming up here, but I feel like when it comes to 4 and 5, those are who would be the consensus there. That's where those two teams belong.
Agreed. And the team above the Indiana Pacers in those odds is the team that they eliminated in the first round of the playoffs, and that's the Milwaukee Bucks. And the Bucks are one of the more fascinating teams. Definitely one of the most fascinating teams this past offseason. I guess it's still actually happening, but it seems like the offseason's over. The Bucks still have Giannis Antetokounmpo. After that, it really feels like last couple years of LeBron Cavs, like 2009, 10, 11, where they just handed him a bunch of role players and said, do your best. That's where we're at with Milwaukee right now. For the uninitiated, Damian Lillard is not there. They cut him and stretched his contract in an unprecedented move. They're paying, I don't know, 17, 20 million in dead cap for the next like 5 years or some ridiculous number. The Bucks are basically Giannis and scraps. Those scraps just happen to be like Kyle Kuzma, who could be good, but isn't. They have Kevin Porter Jr., who played really well down the stretch. They signed him to an extension. They have the aforementioned Miles Turner, who is not Brook Lopez in the same defensive way, but he's younger and maybe has a little more pop than Brook did in his later years. But this is a team that is kind of devoid of guards. I know they have Cole Anthony. They picked him off the heap after he was cut by Memphis after the trade from Orlando. The Bucks still have Giannis, though. I mean, that's just like the overall. Yeah. They still have the best player, arguably, maybe not arguably. They have the best player in the division still in Giannis Antetokounmpo. I mean, what do you think of the Bucks and what they did? I mean, they did something radical this offseason.
They had a tough, tall task staring at them when Damian Lillard went down. And to be quite honest, I feel like they kind of pivoted in the best way that they could. They ate that contract for Lillard. And in the meantime, that allowed them to bring in Miles Turner, who is a definitive upgrade over Brook Lopez, an aging Brook Lopez, who also leaves that organization this offseason. And then after that, look, it's really, really difficult to sign and bring or trade for a player of the caliber of Damian Lillard. So having to pivot off of losing him, bringing in Cole Anthony, they retained Gary Trent Jr. for what I thought was a phenomenal contract. They bring in Gary Harris. Like I don't hate any of those moves. Like I feel like all those guys can help them. I think Ryan Rollins kind of got thrown into the fire last year finally, and actually looked like an NBA player. Like I think he has a very much so a role on this team. I just don't buy their ceiling. Yes, they have Giannis. Yes, he is the best player in the conference. But unless they find a way to add a real secondary, like all-star level scoring type guy that can take some of the burden off of him, I just don't think there's enough talent here to make a massive run in the Eastern Conference. I think it would take Giannis having just like an historically great individual season to drag this team up from where they're at. I think when you look at the division, when you talk about who finishes second, who finishes third, Milwaukee and Detroit, it's pretty close in terms of the odds. I think the majority of the people would have Milwaukee where FanDuel has them at, in third place. But if you look at them and you say they have the best player in the conference, they have that continuity that continuity of having him, the same coaching staff, they bring in Miles Turner, maybe they finish second. Like, I could listen to that argument, but I don't think this is a situation where Milwaukee jumps from, being expected to finish a third in the division to winning the division or anything like that. I just think, their roster is full of a bunch of average guys, and they're blessed to have an elite of the elite. But I think FanDuel has right here. They should be third in the division. I just think that makes the most sense. And God forbid Giannis misses a game. Like, if Giannis misses any stretch of time, this
Right.
goes from they could finish third, or they could drop, and Indiana could jump them.
Yeah. Or a Giannis trade or something. I mean, it could happen. If we're at the trading deadline and the Pistons are, or then the Bucks are, floundering, and that's really their golden parachute out of this mess, is trading Giannis and collecting every pick known to man from whoever, probably like Oklahoma City or something. But yeah, I think they're placed right according to FanDuel. They're plus 950 to win the Central. I don't think they're going to win it. But of course, injuries can happen across the rest of the division. The Pistons and the Cavs are certainly not without their injury risks. But as it stands right now, the Bucks are Giannis and just stuff. And that's a lot of banking on Kyle Kuzma to be a lot better. And I just wouldn't take that bet. You're banking on Cole Anthony taking a significant role as a point guard. You're banking on Kevin Porter Jr. sort of reverting back to those years of when he was with the Houston Rockets and was a really good player, or at least a very good young player. It's just too many ifs. Miles Turner, I think, is probably a one step to the right from Brook Lopez in terms of a rim protector. His rim protection's gone down the past couple of years. He's not as elite as he once was, but he is a good player and was vital for the Pacers during their playoff run. It's just a matter of, does Giannis stay healthy? And how much does he elevate those role players around him to be a little bit better than role players?
Right.
That's going to determine where they fit in the division. But right now, being third, I think that is fine. I think I'm with you. I could see them being second if something should happen to Kate Cunningham, or if Giannis just has that otherworldly type season. But if I was a betting man, I would put the Pistons to be ahead of them when it's all said and done. So the Pistons are second. We're going to leapfrog them for just a moment. We're going to go up to the Cleveland Cavaliers and talk about them, as they have the best odds to win the Central Division according to FanDuel at minus 310. They have the second best odds to win the NBA championship next year, and I think they are the betting favorite to win the conference as well. So this is a tough division. You have the defending Eastern Conference champions, as withered as they are after losing Turner and Halliburton. You have Giannis to deal with, and you have the Cavaliers, who were the best team in the conference last year. Aaron, I could talk about the Cavs for a while, but why don't you give your thoughts on the Cavs as the betting favorite to win the Central Division?
Look, the Cavs deserve the number one spot. They are probably the favorite to come out of the Eastern Conference, so they should be winning this division. The roster continuity for them is big, right? They keep Donovan Mitchell. They are not trading Jarrett Allen. They're not trading Darius Garland. There is still another level to Evan Mobley's game. I know there were some prominent people talking about, is this the year that Evan Mobley becomes the best player on the Cavs? As a big-time Donovan Mitchell guy, I don't know if that necessarily happens, but I think he could definitely close the gap. And then I like what they did in the offseason. They brought in Lonzo Ball, who is going to help them. They bring in Larry Nance, who is a very fine role player. And I like that they brought in Sam Merrill. They got Tyrese Proctor in the draft, someone that I liked as well. Like all of their marginal moves, they get a full season of DeAndre Hunter as well. All of those around the margin moves to build around this core, this foundation that they have very clearly committed to. I think that all makes a ton of sense. This is still a team that has to show they're for real and actually make a run in the playoffs and stop bowing out early in the first and second round. They need to get to a conference championship. And when I look at the Eastern Conference this year, if I'm the Cleveland Cavaliers, the expectation is not just to win a round or two in the playoffs this year. My expectations are to get to the NBA Finals. The Western Conference is a different kind of beast, and maybe they're not good enough to beat Oklahoma City or whoever they end up facing coming out of the West in the finals, but I'm paying a lot of money to this core. I have now gone out this offseason and prioritized getting the right pieces and spending around this core to bring in a different mix of role players. I need to see them not just win a couple playoff series. I need to see them make a legitimate run. And I think the Eastern Conference is as open as it's ever going to be with all of the injuries. Is their biggest challenge the New York Knicks? Maybe. Outside of that, who are the threats to come out of the East? Cleveland is that team. So they should have no problem winning the Central Division. They have two of the best players in the conference in Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley. They have two all-star level players alongside them in Darius Garland and Jarrett Allen. And I think that their supporting cast is rock solid. So this is Cleveland's division to lose. Quite frankly, this is Cleveland's conference to lose.
Yeah, I'll definitely agree with you on the division side of things, and they are the betting favorites to come out of the conference. And speaking of those New York Knicks, we do have just a smidge of breaking news. The Knicks did sign Mikal Bridges to a 4-year, $150 million extension. It's a little bit of a discount, so it gives the Knicks some flexibility if they wanted to adjust their roster. They are the second best team in the conference, most likely, the Knicks. But the Cavs at 64-18 last year, obviously going out the way they did was incredibly disappointing. And it does set a precedent for them as teams, as a team that just kind of withers in the playoffs. But in terms of winning the division, you're right. They should win the division. They are returning plenty of talent from Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley, and really Mobley he's the X factor again. If he does take that leap that I think most people are hoping and Kenny Atkinson is expecting, then this team is going to, put itself in a very good position to win the conference. And you're right, they get a full year of DeAndre Hunter. They did lose Ty Jerome, who was incredibly important to them as a backup point guard, but you're right with Lonzo Ball. So Ball and Nance do two things that they didn't really have as much last year, which was be different. Ty Jerome was not a very good defender. So whenever you had him on the floor, you paired him with Mitchell or Garland, you were really banking on one of the better defenders sort of masking him. You can't do that with Lonzo Ball. He's a little bit harder to block out because he could hurt you as a passer and he could hurt you as a defender. Same thing with Larry Nance. You can play Larry Nance at the 5 next to an Evan Mobley. You could play him at the 4 next to a Jarrett Allen. It gives them a little bit more flexibility. I think that was the whole point for the Cavs this offseason, was to be different. I think they did that. They became different around the margins, like you said. 64-18 is tough to top. I don't know what their over-under on the win total is, but they are the betting favorites to win the division. They should be. I think it makes a lot of sense. That being said, the pathway to another team overcoming them in the division, I think, will come down to injuries. They have a history of having some injuries. Darius Garland has had plenty of them. Jarrett Allen had some rib injuries the past couple of years. He did play all 82 games this year, so it's hard to say that he's going to come out and beat an injury risk. But Garland's had injuries. Evan Mobley has had injuries. DeAndre Hunter has had injuries. I mean, there's lots of players on that roster who've had injuries. Lonzo Ball has obviously had injuries, between both of his knees. So there's certainly some risk there. But I think FanDuel got it right by having the Cavs at -310, the best odds to win the Central Division. So that's going to bring us to the Pistons, who have the second best odds at +500. Detroit had 44 wins last year. Their over-under is, I don't know, 48.5 or something. We'll talk about that at another time. But in terms of winning the division, the Pistons made a lot of moves, and we've talked about this all offseason. The Pistons have made moves that I think probably haven't elevated them to the stature that people were expecting, but it hasn't made them any worse. And I think in terms of the Malik Beasley stuff, they pivoted in a way that I think keeps them very relevant. I think they're kind of moves that are reminiscent of a team that became good too fast, and the front office is not quite ready to flip the table and go get a second star for Cade, but they're not ready to sit on their hands and do nothing. That seemed like the Pistons offseason to me. So at +500, second best odds, what do you feel that FanDuel got that right?
I do. And this was an offseason that I will admit, just looking at the what left and what came in, to me is a bit underwhelming. But it's very clear that the Pistons are not going to take a leap this year based off what they added to the roster. It's going to be based on the internal development from the 4 or 5 young guys on their team that have considerable potential. Like, obviously there's another level for Cade Cunningham. That is going from a top 10 to 15-ish player in the NBA into the top 10 itself. There's a massive jump still available for guys like Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren heading into contract seasons with a lot to prove. Obviously, Jaden Ivey coming off a season-ending injury last year, where there are a lot of smart people in the NBA that believe the Pistons could have beaten the Knicks in that playoff series had Jaden Ivey been available. And then there's Ausar Thompson, who I think is like the X factor to all of this, because what is his ceiling and what kind of leap is he going to make next season? Once he got into a rhythm and once he got his legs under him last season after joining the season late, coming off of that scary blood clot issue that ended his rookie season, delayed the start to his second season, cost him his offseason, transitioning from his rookie year into his second year. Once he got his legs under him, he was one of the Pistons' top 3-4 most important players. And man, he was super, super impressive in the playoffs as well. The stuff that they did offensively with him and Duren, as well as obviously what he can do for them defensively, was super, super impressive. There is a leap for Ausar that is, it's not just becoming a better player, but it's becoming an all-star level player. And that's not going to happen all at once. Like, Ausar Thompson's not going to be an all-star this upcoming season, but he can make a serious, serious leap. And if they continue to get growth from all of those young guys, we haven't even talked about Ron Holland. We haven't even talked about Isaiah Stewart. Those guys all continue to grow. They all continue to develop. You're essentially getting better versions of all of those players. You're adding in Jaden Ivey to that mix. And then you still have Tobias Harris, who was rock solid for Detroit last year. You bring in Karis LeVert, you bring in Duncan Robinson. There is talent there. I don't know what this team's ceiling is right now. I still feel like they are, depending on what type of internal development there is, they're still a piece or two away from, hey, this team could compete for the conference championship. Like, I don't think they're near Cleveland yet in terms of levels, but they can be a top 5 seed in this conference. It's after New York and Cleveland. There could be a scenario where Detroit gets to third place in the conference. A lot would have to swing right for them. There would have to be a lot of improvement from their young core, but there is at least there is a universe where that could in theory happen. Are they better than Orlando? Are they better than a team like Atlanta, who is seemingly the NBA Twitter, the NBA blogger, the NBA podcaster darling after the offseason that they had? But I think Detroit has a real good chance to be a top five team in the conference. They should very much be a team where the expectation is to get into the playoffs without having to play in the play-in, and the goal should be to be hosting a first-round playoff series for this group. I don't think they're near Cleveland. I just don't really see a world where they leap Cleveland unless the Cavs just completely blow up. There's injuries. It just isn't, someone gets traded because they ask out whatever. Like, it would take a lot for Detroit to get to a point where they could live in a world where they jump the Cavaliers. But I think that FanDuel is right when they have the Pistons as the second best team in the Central Division. I think that's the correct take.
Yeah, for sure. They are young, they are talented, and I think the other thing that, and we've talked about this plenty, is that they just have guys that you don't quite know exactly what their talent level is. Ron Holland was very good in Summer League. Not that Summer League is always indicative of how well you play in the regular season. And honestly, he should be playing really well in Summer League because it's Summer League and he was a top 5 pick in the draft. We don't know what Jaden Ivey is going to look like. Asar Thompson clearly has another gear, up in terms of being a better offensive player. So there's just a lot of potential. And that's why I kind of said at the beginning that it feels like this is an organization that became good like earlier than they thought, and they didn't want to go all in on a type of star. These are very, moving around the margin type moves. I do have some worries about them still at backup point guard. So like we've talked about this for 3 years now in a row. Because Karis LeVert right now is their backup point guard, really, and he was that under JB Bickerstaff. But other than that, this is a team that has a good mix of veterans with Paul Reed and Duncan Robinson, who've been to the playoffs. It's a good mix of young players, and it has the runner-up for Coach of the Year. Still going to be a very good team. I agree. I think they're a top 5 seed, most likely, barring an injury. But in terms of winning the Central Division, FanDuel at plus 500, I think makes a lot of sense. They are behind the Cavs right now. There is a pathway for them to pass the Cavs. I think it just requires so much to go right.
So much. So much would have to go right for Detroit, and so much would have to go wrong for Cleveland at the same time. And it's not a knock on Detroit. Like, just look at what the Cavs have compared to you, and it's just very obvious why Cleveland is 2 notches above you in terms of tiers. Like, they are a title contender. They are the favorite to come out of the Eastern Conference. Pistons are not at that level. The Pistons hitting their peak this year is what? The conference finals, getting there? Like, that would be a massive over production for this team, I think. Like,
huge.
I don't know. Unless Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, Asar Thompson, and Cade Cunningham and Ron Holland, like, unless all these guys just take this massive leap all at once, I just don't know what the pathway is for them to come out of the conference.
It would have to be a Golden State Warriors-esque leap where everybody hits immediately, like Draymond Green, Klay Thompson. You have your Steph Curry, all of them hit at the exact same time and just became this juggernaut. It would have to be that type of leap.
Now, there is still that flexibility, however, with Detroit's roster and with their cap situation, to where they could be one of those contenders to make a trade in the middle of the season. And you look at some of the guys, every year there's 1 or 2 all-star level players that get dealt. The Pistons are in a financial position to where they could be a team that goes after one of those all-star guys. I mean, I think back to Indiana getting Pascal Siakam a few years ago at the deadline. Can Detroit make a move like that this year? And is that what they're setting up for after the offseason that they just had, where they did not commit a ton of future money to anybody, and as of now have still not committed future money to Jaden Ivey or Jalen Duren, who are heading into a contract season?
True.
So there is flexibility for Detroit to make a big swing still, even if it's not in the summer, even if it doesn't come until January or February. Like, they could make one of that big splash move that does take them up to the next level, and then this is a completely different discussion. But for looking at where they're at right now and looking at the rest of the teams in the conference, I think in the division, I think this is right with where FanDuel has Detroit.
Yep, I think they've got the order of the Central Division correct. So that is our sort of preview of the Central with regards to who is going to be able to win it. We didn't really talk about pathways for any of these teams to really win it, other than the Cavs and a little bit the Pistons.
Because nobody has a realistic, realistically, nobody has a pathway outside of Cleveland to winning this division.
I think the Bucks do. I think the Bucks do just because they have Giannis, and he's the ultimate wild card because he is that good. It just would require so much. He would have to be so good and elevate surrounding players in a LeBron-esque way to do that. And I think if you're beating out the Cavs in the division, then you're also the number one seed, which is I just don't see that either.
I don't see it. I think I'd bet on Detroit to win the conference over or the division over Milwaukee. Like Giannis
would agree with you.
Giannis would have to just have like historically maybe the best season in league history.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, I don't hate what Milwaukee did this offseason. They could only pivot so much with their financial situation. And having to waive an all-star point guard Damian Lillard, like they could only pivot so much. And I think they did a fine job. That being said, that's just not a roster that should be sniffing winning a division with a team that won 64 games last year.
Waive and still pay Damian Lillard because they are still paying him. So really interesting. I mean, that's a really interesting precedent to set just around the league in general. It's waiving and stretching a guy like Damian Lillard. It just doesn't happen. It happens to Josh Smith. It happens to, plenty of guys. It doesn't happen to a Damian Lillard. It sets a very interesting precedent around the league. But Aaron, that's our Central Division preview. Do you have any other thoughts before we wrap up this edition of the podcast?
No, I mean, look, obviously all of this is subject to change. I mean, with where we're at in the offseason, it does feel like every year around August, September, there is that one surprise move where a real impact player gets dealt. So maybe that impacts this division, but unless there's a trade, the free agency class kind of is what it is right now. I don't think anyone in the division is really looking at a big free agency signing still. So
yeah.
Unless there's a really big move from now until the start of the season, I don't see how this changes unless, one of these teams' top players goes down with an injury. I think these odds are what they are for a reason. I think and the separation in the odds is what they are for a reason, because I think everyone is kind of within their own little tier. I think maybe the closest gap is Detroit and Milwaukee, but I still feel like Detroit's sum of parts and just like the ceiling of those parts is much better than what Milwaukee has around Giannis.
Right. Look, I think you're right. I was just trying to see what that pathway would have to be, and it would have to be Giannis being ungodly, and then the rest of the guys around him taking like 2 orders of magnitude up in terms of their capabilities, which I don't think is going to happen. Aaron, last question. How do you feel about Charlie Morton?
I can't say I'm super pumped about the Detroit Tigers trade deadline. Just watching the AL make all these impact moves, and the Tigers being one of the teams that was leading up to the deadline, being one of the teams that was expected to make some serious moves, for their biggest addition to be Chris Paddock or Charlie Morton, or Kyle Finnegan, like, if they had gotten all those guys and still been able to get somebody else, like a big name, whether it was Eugenio Suarez, whether it was Doval from the Giants, I don't know. But man,
and he went to the Yankees.
What is the desire here to bring in all of these 35 and up pitchers? I don't know if I see the vision there. The Tigers are just making Chris Fetter's life a living hell. They're just giving him all these guys and just say, hey, fix him and fix him and fix him. Like, man, I feel bad for that guy. He's got to get a staunch bonus at the end of the year for all the work he's doing.
Yeah, but this isn't the Palace of Tigers. This is the Palace of Pistons. And that's going to do it for this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast. Aaron, we had a great time talking about the conference. We had a great time looking at some of the odds from our new partners for this podcast, and that would be FanDuel. So thank you to FanDuel for sponsoring this edition of the podcast. For my co-host, Aaron Johnson, I am Mike Anguilano. Thank you so much for joining us on this week's edition of the Palace Pistons podcast, part of the Believe Network and brought to you by FanDuel. We will see you all next time.